Picture this. You're a mid-level German diplomat in 1943. You work in Berlin, in the heart of Nazi Germany, surrounded by Gestapo agents, informers, and true believers in Hitler's regime. Every day you walk past soldiers in black uniforms, past buildings adorned with swastikas, past propaganda posters showing Germany's supposed glorious destiny. And you're carrying a leather briefcase. Inside that briefcase are some of the most explosive secrets of World War II. Documents that could change the course of the war. Intelligence about German troop movements, factory locations, diplomatic cables, and spy networks. You're not smuggling these secrets out of fear or for money. You're doing it because you believe Nazi Germany must be destroyed. And you're about to walk into Switzerland to hand everything over to the Americans. This is the true story of Fritz Kolbe, the man who became America's most valuable spy in World War II. A man whose name you've probably never heard. And trust me, this story is better than any James Bond movie because every single word of it actually happened. Let's go back to the beginning. Fritz Kolbe was born in 1900 in Berlin, the son of a saddle maker. Not exactly the background you'd expect for a master spy, right? His father made saddles and harnesses for the German military, honest work in an honest trade. But the world was changing fast. Factories were replacing craftsmen, and Fritz's father watched his business slowly die. He ended up working in a factory himself, and this left a mark on young Fritz. He saw what pride looked like when it was crushed. He saw what happened when the world moved on and left you behind. Fritz was short, only about 5'7", but he was absolutely fanatical about physical fitness. Sports were his obsession. Running, swimming, hiking, you name it. He collected sports medals like other people collected stamps. This wasn't just a hobby for him. It was a way of proving himself, of showing he could excel despite his modest height and modest background. And that drive, that relentless determination, would later make him one of the most audacious spies in history. When World War I broke out, Fritz was too young to fight, but he served briefly toward the end of the war. What he saw disgusted him. The waste, the death, the absolute pointlessness of it all. While other Germans, including a bitter Austrian corporal named Adolf Hitler, swore revenge for Germany's defeat, Fritz Kolbe took away a completely different lesson. War was evil. Nationalism was dangerous. And anyone who wanted to lead Germany down that bloody path again was an enemy of humanity. After the war, Fritz joined the German Foreign Ministry. This was the 1920s, the Weimar Republic era, when Germany was trying to rebuild itself as a democracy. Fritz worked hard, learned languages, and built a reputation as a reliable, competent bureaucrat. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. Just a guy who showed up, did his job, and went home. Perfect cover for what would come later. Then, 1933. Hitler came to power. Suddenly, Germany wasn't a democracy anymore. It was a dictatorship led by a man who promised to make Germany great again through conquest and racial purity. The Foreign Ministry, like every government agency, was flooded with Nazi party members. Ambitious careerists who wore their swastikas proudly and gave the Hitler salute with enthusiasm. And there was Fritz Kolbe, still just a mid-level official, still not a party member. Here's the thing. The Nazis needed people like Fritz. They needed experienced civil servants who actually knew how the government worked. You can't run a massive bureaucracy on ideology alone. You need people who understand filing systems, diplomatic protocols, and foreign languages. So Fritz kept his job, even though he refused to join the Nazi Party. His bosses tolerated him because he was competent, and he kept his mouth shut. They had no idea what he was really thinking. But inside, Fritz Kolbe was seething. He watched as Germany rearmed. He watched as Hitler tore up international treaties. He watched the persecution of Jews begin. He saw his country transforming into something monstrous, and he felt absolutely powerless to stop it. What could one man do against a totalitarian regime? By 1936, Fritz was working at the German embassy in Madrid, Spain. This was during the Spanish Civil War, and Germany was supporting Franco's fascists. Fritz met a Jewish businessman named Ernst Kocherthaler, who would later become crucial to Fritz's journey into espionage. But for now, Fritz just kept his head down and did his job. Then came the real war. 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Then Denmark and Norway. Then France. By 1941, Germany controlled most of Europe and was pushing deep into the Soviet Union. The Nazi Empire was at its height, and Fritz Kolbe was back in Berlin, working in the Foreign Ministry's personnel department under Ambassador Karl Ritter. He had access to cables, to diplomatic communications, to secret documents flowing through the ministry every single day. He saw everything. The planning for military operations, intelligence reports about Allied movements, communications with Germany's allies. And he realized something. He was sitting on a gold mine of information that could help destroy the regime he hated. But here's the problem. How do you become a spy when you're surrounded by Nazis? Who do you trust? Who do you contact? One wrong move, one misplaced word, and you're arrested by the Gestapo. And you know what the Gestapo did to suspected traitors? Torture, show trials, execution. Fritz had a family. He had a life. Was he really willing to risk everything? The turning point came in 1943. By then, the war had turned against Germany. The Germans had been defeated at Stalingrad. North Africa was lost. The Allies were bombing German cities night after night. Fritz could see that Germany was going to lose, but he could also see that Hitler would drag the war out, would sacrifice millions more lives before accepting defeat. Someone had to do something to shorten the war. Someone had to help the Allies win faster. And Fritz Kolbe decided that someone was him. He reconnected with his friend Ernst Kocherthaler, the Jewish businessman from Spain who was now living in neutral Switzerland. Through coded messages, Fritz let Kocherthaler know that he had important information and needed to make contact with the Allies. Kocherthaler understood immediately. He agreed to be the intermediary. But there was still one huge problem. How could Fritz get to Switzerland? Germany was a police state. You couldn't just buy a train ticket to a neutral country. You needed official permission. You needed paperwork. You needed a reason that wouldn't raise suspicion. Fritz came up with a brilliant plan. The German Foreign Ministry regularly sent diplomatic couriers to the German legation in Bern, Switzerland. These couriers carried official government mail in sealed diplomatic pouches. Fritz volunteered to be a courier. His boss, Ambassador Ritter, liked Fritz and trusted him. He thought Fritz deserved a break, a chance to get out of bomb-ravaged Berlin for a few days and enjoy the peace and plenty of neutral Switzerland. So he approved Fritz's trip. Fritz had to sign documents promising to return to Germany. He had to guarantee his political reliability. And all the while, he was planning to betray everything. August 15, 1943, 7 in the evening. Fritz Kolbe walked into the Anhalter Bahnhof, the main train station in Berlin. He was carrying his diplomatic pouch filled with official German government mail. And hidden inside his jacket, folded up and concealed, were dozens of photocopied top-secret documents he'd stolen from the Foreign Ministry. His heart must have been hammering in his chest. If anyone searched him, if anyone became suspicious, he was a dead man. But nobody searched him. He boarded the 8:20 train to Basel. And as the train rolled through the night, leaving Berlin behind, Fritz Kolbe crossed the line from German bureaucrat to American spy. He arrived in Bern the next day. Switzerland was like another planet compared to Germany. No bombings, no rationing, shops full of food and luxuries. And somewhere in this peaceful city was Alan Dulles, the head of the American Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's wartime intelligence agency. Fritz had to find him. First, he tried the British. Ernst Kocherthaler arranged for Fritz to meet with British intelligence, and Fritz showed them some of his documents. Real, genuine, top-secret German Foreign Ministry cables. The British looked at the documents. Then they looked at Fritz. Then they said no. They didn't trust him. They thought it was too good to be true. They were convinced Fritz must be a double agent, that this was some kind of German trick. They turned him away. Fritz must have been devastated. He'd risked everything, and the British didn't want him. But Kocherthaler didn't give up. He had another contact, a connection to the American OSS. Through a series of intermediary meetings, a meeting was finally arranged. Midnight. The apartment of Gerald Mayer, an American official. Alan Dulles would be there in disguise. Alan Dulles was a lawyer from a wealthy American family. His older brother, John Foster Dulles, would later become Secretary of State. Alan himself would later head the CIA. But in 1943, he was running the OSS station in Bern, Switzerland, and he was under pressure to deliver results. The OSS was a new organization, and a lot of people in Washington thought it was amateur hour, a bunch of lawyers and academics playing at being spies. Dulles needed a big win to prove the OSS was worth funding. And then Fritz Kolbe walked through his door. The meeting happened around midnight. Dulles arrived in disguise, introduced as someone named Mr. Douglas. Fritz was wearing a black leather jacket. And then Fritz opened his briefcase and started laying out documents on the table. Cables from German embassies around the world. Reports about troop movements. Intelligence about German spy networks. Details about factory locations. And it was all genuine. All top secret. All incredibly valuable. Dulles was skeptical at first, just like the British. Could this possibly be real? Was this mild-mannered German diplomat really handing over Germany's secrets? But as Dulles read through the documents, his skepticism faded. This was the real deal. This was an intelligence officer's dream. He looked at Fritz Kolbe and made a decision. He would take the risk. He would trust this man. And he gave Fritz a code name. George Wood. Fritz returned to Berlin a few days later with his diplomatic pouch, having completed his official career duties. Nobody suspected a thing, and he immediately began planning his next trip, because he hadn't just handed over one batch of documents. He planned to do this again and again, for as long as the war lasted. Over the next 2 years, Fritz Kolbe made multiple trips to Switzerland as a diplomatic courier, and every single time, he brought more secrets. He developed a network of friends and allies within the foreign ministry, about 20 people total, who shared his hatred of the Nazis and helped him copy documents. They used carbon paper. They photographed papers after hours. They took advantage of every moment when offices were empty and guards were distracted. And Fritz smuggled it all out, hidden in his clothes, in his briefcase, in diplomatic pouches. He was playing the most dangerous game imaginable, right under the noses of the Gestapo. The information he provided was staggering. He revealed the locations of German V-1 and V-2 rocket production facilities, which the Allies then bombed. He exposed German intelligence operations in neutral countries. He identified Nazi spies working in Allied territories. He provided detailed reports about Germany's diplomatic relations with countries like Spain and Turkey. He even uncovered the Cicero affair. Cicero was the code name for a spy working for Germany inside the British embassy in Turkey. Thanks to Fritz's information, the British eventually shut down that security breach. Fritz Kolbe was supplying information that could have shortened the war by months. But here's the frustrating part. A lot of his intelligence was ignored. See, the Americans, and especially the British, were paranoid. They couldn't quite believe that someone this valuable could simply walk in and offer to help. There must be a trick, they thought. This must be a German deception operation. The British intelligence officer Claude Danzy absolutely hated Alan Dulles, and he refused to believe that Dulles could possibly have recruited such a valuable source. So Danzy kept insisting Fritz was a double agent. Meanwhile, the OSS counter-espionage division spent months trying to verify Fritz's authenticity instead of acting on his intelligence. It was maddening. Fritz was risking his life, and bureaucrats were sitting on his information. Alan Dulles, to his credit, believed in Fritz. He kept pushing Washington to take the intelligence seriously. And gradually, over time, more and more people started to realize that George Wood was genuine. By late 1944, Fritz's intelligence was reaching the highest levels. President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill were both briefed on information from Fritz Kolbe. British code breakers used Fritz's documents to help crack German diplomatic codes. The OSS started acting on his tips. And Fritz himself kept going back to Berlin, kept stealing documents, kept walking into Switzerland with a briefcase full of treason. Think about the courage that took. Every time Fritz crossed the border, he was searched by German customs officials. Every time he returned to Berlin, he had to face his colleagues and bosses and pretend everything was normal. He attended meetings with Nazis. He processed paperwork for the regime. He gave the Hitler salute when required, even though it made him sick. And all the while, he was sabotaging everything from the inside. There was one moment when he almost got caught. Fritz was at a German customs post, having his luggage checked before returning to Berlin. He had a roll of film hidden in his coat pocket, film containing photographs of stolen documents. The customs clerk started going through Fritz's coat, checking the pockets. Fritz's hand slipped into his other pocket and closed around his pistol. He'd decided long ago that if he was caught, he wouldn't let the Gestapo take him alive. He'd shoot himself first. The clerk's hands moved closer to the pocket with the film. Fritz was prepared to pull the trigger. And then another clerk walked into the room and started chatting, distracting the first clerk. The search stopped. Fritz's parcel was packed up. He walked out, went straight to his office, locked the door, and drank a double cognac to stop himself from shaking. By April 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing. The Russians were fighting in the streets of Berlin. Hitler was in his bunker. The war was clearly ending. Fritz made one last trip to Bern. The OSS wanted him to go to the German legation there and warn the German envoy, Otto Kocher, not to destroy consular records that might contain evidence of war crimes. Fritz went to see Kocher and told him the truth. The war is over. You have to choose between Hitler and Germany. Stop destroying documents. But Kocher was furious. He accused Fritz of being a traitor and threw him out of the office. A few days later, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over, and Fritz Kolbe found himself in a strange position. He'd helped the Allies win. He'd provided some of the most valuable intelligence of the entire war. The OSS estimated he'd passed along more than 1,600 secret documents. Former CIA Director Richard Helms would later call Fritz's information the best intelligence produced by any Allied agent in World War II. Fritz had been a hero, but nobody in Germany saw it that way. Otto Kocher, the German envoy Fritz had confronted, hanged himself in an Allied internment camp. Other former Foreign Ministry officials blamed Fritz for Kocher's death. They called Fritz a traitor. They said he'd betrayed Germany. And when Fritz tried to get his old job back at the Foreign Ministry after the war, they refused to hire him. Former Nazis who had wormed their way back into the new West German government made sure Fritz Kolbe would never work in government again. He was blacklisted. Fritz tried to move to the United States in 1949. He thought maybe he'd be appreciated there. Maybe he could start over. But he couldn't find work. Nobody wanted to hire him. He ended up taking a job as a sales representative for an American power saw manufacturer. Fritz Kolbe, the man who helped defeat Hitler, ended up selling power tools for a living. Allen Dulles, meanwhile, became a famous figure. He was appointed director of the CIA in 1953. His exploits were written up in magazines and newspapers. And to Dulles's credit, he never forgot Fritz. In interviews, Dulles always spoke about George Wood, his most valuable source. He never revealed Fritz's real name publicly during Fritz's lifetime, protecting his identity, but he made sure people knew that the OSS had recruited an extraordinary agent inside Nazi Germany. In 1953, the New York Times called George Wood the most valuable and prolific source of intelligence out of Germany during the war. But Fritz himself remained unknown. He lived quietly in Germany, largely forgotten and often despised by his countrymen. He watched as former Nazis rebuilt their careers while he struggled to make ends meet. He saw war criminals get light sentences or go free while he, a man who'd risked everything to fight the Nazis, was treated like a pariah. The irony was bitter. The injustice was complete. Fritz Kolbe died in February 1971 in Bern, Switzerland, from gallbladder cancer. He was 71 years old. He's buried in Berlin, in the Lusenkirche Cemetery. For decades after his death, his story remained mostly unknown. A few spy historians knew about George Wood, but almost nobody connected that code name to Fritz Kolbe. It wasn't until the year 2000 that the full story finally came out. The U.S. National Archives released previously classified OSS documents, and researchers were finally able to piece together Fritz Kolbe's incredible story. Lucas Delettre, a French journalist, wrote a detailed biography called A Spy at the Heart of the Third Reich. And suddenly, more than 50 years after his death, Fritz Kolbe started getting the recognition he deserved. Today, the German Resistance Memorial Center in Berlin honors Fritz Kolbe as one of the unsung heroes of the resistance to Nazism. His story is taught in schools. Historians acknowledge him as one of the most important spies of World War II. And people finally understand the courage it took to do what he did. Think about what Fritz Kolbe actually accomplished. He wasn't a trained spy. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a bureaucrat, a mid-level government official who decided that he couldn't stand by while his country committed monstrous crimes. He didn't do it for money. The OSS offered to pay him, but he refused. He didn't do it for fame. He knew his actions would have to remain secret. He did it because he believed it was the right thing to do. Because he loved Germany enough to betray the Nazi regime that had hijacked his country. In a way, Fritz Kolbe represents something important about World War II that often gets forgotten. We focus so much on the battles, on D-Day and Stalingrad and Midway, that we sometimes forget about the individuals who fought in quieter ways. The people who passed information, who hid refugees, who sabotaged factories, who resisted in whatever way they could. Fritz was one of those people. He never fired a shot, but he helped win the war. And his story raises an interesting question. What would you do in his position? Imagine you're living in a totalitarian state. Your government is committing terrible crimes. You have access to information that could help stop it, but passing that information on means risking your life and the lives of everyone you love. Do you keep your head down and try to survive? Do you tell yourself that one person can't make a difference? Or do you take the risk? Fritz Kolbe took the risk. And yes, his life after the war was difficult. Yes, he was treated unfairly by his own country. Yes, he died without ever receiving the recognition he deserved during his lifetime. But he also knew something that his critics never understood. He knew that when the history books were finally written, when all the secrets were finally revealed, people would see that he'd been on the right side. He'd fought against evil in the most dangerous way possible. He'd walked into Berlin every day, worked alongside Nazis, and stolen their secrets to help destroy them. There's a detail about Fritz that I find really moving. Remember how I mentioned he was obsessed with physical fitness and sports? Even in his later years, when he was struggling financially and professionally, when he was largely forgotten and sometimes despised, he kept his sports medals. He showed them to people. They were his source of pride, because those medals represented something pure, something that couldn't be taken away from him. They represented his determination, his refusal to give up, his belief that he could achieve difficult things if he just kept pushing. That's who Fritz Kolbe was. A man who refused to accept defeat. A man who believed in doing the right thing even when it cost him everything. A man who walked into enemy territory again and again, carrying briefcases full of Nazi secrets, because he believed the world could be better and he was willing to risk everything to make it so. The story of Fritz Kolbe reminds us that heroes don't always look like heroes. They don't always get medals and parades. Sometimes they're short guys with thinning hair who sell power tools for a living. Sometimes they die in obscurity. Sometimes they're forgotten for decades. But that doesn't make them any less heroic. That doesn't make their courage any less real. Fritz Kolbe walked into Berlin. He worked in the heart of Nazi Germany. He stole secrets from under the noses of the Gestapo. He handed those secrets to the Americans. And he helped win World War II. That's not a footnote in history. That's not a minor detail. That's one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in the entire war. And now, finally, more than 80 years later, people are starting to understand just how extraordinary it really was. So the next time you hear about World War II, remember Fritz Kolbe. Remember the spy who walked into Berlin. Remember the man who refused to be a bystander. Remember the bureaucrat who became a hero. Because his story is just as important as any battle, any general, any famous name you've ever heard. And unlike a lot of war stories, this one has a clear moral. Evil can be fought. Totalitarianism can be resisted. One person really can make a difference. You just have to be willing to take the risk. Fritz Kolbe took that risk. And in doing so, he changed the course of history. Not bad for a short guy from Berlin who just wanted to do the right thing. That's the story of the spy who walked into Berlin. A man you've probably never heard of. A man who should be as famous as any war hero. A man whose courage and determination helped save the world. Fritz Kolbe, codename George Wood, the greatest spy you never knew about. Until now.